Hello, and welcome back to the Be More Connected Summit. Today, our guest is the wonderful June. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, I'm so excited to be in your presence and your space. And I just love you so much and all the ways that you've helped me reconnect with my own unique blueprint with human design.
Wonderful. And so June Kaewsith is a professional artist, a wellness consultant, and a storytelling coach. And as an artist, a spoken word artist, she curates amazing workshops. She works with individuals who are serving their communities, whether that's related to environmental justice, racial justice, healing, storytelling, and individuals and artists seeking to expand their confidence and their ability to speak vulnerably and share their stories with the world. And so, June, that was a more formal introduction, but I want to invite you and ask you, who is June Kaewsith?
So, who is June Kaewsith?
Oh,
well, many people know me as Jumake, and that essentially is a combination of my first, middle, and last name, which came as a result of people not being able to pronounce my last name initially. So it's actually Kaewsith, which is totally okay.
My apologies.
No, it's totally okay because I grew up with my name being very anglicized, which is a common experience for people who are immigrants, where we change our name from like Sully to Nancy or something like that, just to make it easier for other people to say, for Americans. So I actually grew up with the last name Kaewsith legally on my school documents. I was a Smith, and my dad said that the reason why he chose that name was because when he would apply for jobs, people might think he's white.
Wow. And that's a common experience. That
a very common experience.
People even to this day.
And so it wasn't until later that my parents changed our last name back to Kaewsith. And so it still gets switched up, which is totally fine. And Jumake came as a result of me becoming an artist, doing spoken word. I got into murals as well. I was doing community murals. And so Jumake was kind of like my signature. And so when people ask, what is it you prefer to be called? I'm like, sure. Some people like to say Jumake. That reminds me of my days as an MC and being on stage.
Yes.
And June is totally fine too. So I am Thai American, and I identify as a storytelling coach and life doula, helping change makers and aspiring entrepreneurs find clarity in their message and confidence in their speaking so that their medicine can reach the masses. And what I am especially excited about is helping women and people of color step into entrepreneurship as a form of sacred activism, reclaiming their ancestral medicine as a path towards decolonization. But we cannot do that work until we are fully embodying the medicine it is we want to share with the world. So as a storytelling coach, the foundation of the work begins with the stories that we're telling ourselves and the ways that it has manifested in our bodies, the ways that colonization has impacted the ways we show up in the world, ascribe to the dominant narrative that has told us we are not worthy enough of being able to tell our stories and put our services out there. And also telling our stories from a place of empowerment so that we can move whatever stagnation we are experiencing in our body into one of possibilities and pleasure and joy.
Incredible. And you just said so much in that introduction. And I think I'd like to kind of hone in a little bit more around this piece of sacred activism and how you were able to find your voice and create a community and a business that's really centered in allowing people to find their own connection to their ancestors, to their own personal calling, and share that with the world, particularly for people of color and for women who are living within these systems that are creating the dynamic that is that can be incredibly confining and diminishing to be able to step into your fullness and your wholeness.
Well, I think for many of us who have come into this awakening of the systems that have informed our current power and place in the world, or lack thereof, it begins with my roots in activism. In my 20s, I was a community organizer, and all of my music and my poetry was fueled by anger. And I had no idea where else to put that other than channeling it through my art. And so I attended every protest that I could, went to every community meeting that I could attend, and I joined every collective that would have me, which of course led to burnout, trying to be all things for everybody and not knowing how to do it for myself.
Sure.
And I think that the peak of it, though, came from my last job working as a community organizer and a violence preventionist at a domestic violence agency, where I did workshops in the community to address domestic violence and sexual assault prevention, primarily in the Southeast Asian community. And also, I think it's important to ask, what are the life experiences we've had that have informed our why? Why is it we do the work that we do? And for me, that begins with my childhood, being a survivor myself of child sexual trauma. While my parents were out working, and my sister, she's 11 years older than me, we had a neighbor who offered graciously to babysit. And of course, I grew up not being believed by my parents because he's a nice man and he wouldn't do that. And it wasn't until he passed away where I was able to have a heart-to-heart conversation with my mom about how that experience impacted me and informed the work that I do, which is wanting to make sure that nobody else needs to suffer. And so throughout the calls I would have with different survivors on the crisis hotline, there was a common narrative that I was taking in, which, I mean, at the root of it, I think we have to acknowledge these systems that create the lack of access to resources that can help survivors financially thrive and be independent. But if we are not believing that we are worthy of a different story and of a different life, then it doesn't matter what resources are out there. So the work truly does begin with ourselves and our own beliefs, and taking these conversations beyond anonymous calls, but creating a sacred container for other people on a similar path to step into what is possible.
So powerful.
So I feel like with these systems that we have in place, primarily I'm talking about direct service, these crisis calls, the criminal justice system, how much of it is actually addressing the root cause? We're just dealing with the symptoms. And even though I alone cannot dismantle capitalism and racism and patriarchy, I now know that it can happen with one person at a time. But that must first begin with addressing my own internalized oppression and the stories that I have been telling myself before even thinking of what my service is going to be to other people. And so, long story short, I was liberated from that job which came with its own challenges. I was bedridden.
Wow.
For several weeks. I didn't have health insurance either because that was taken away from me. And I just remember lying in bed, feeling the worst pain I've ever felt between my hips, in my reproductive system, in my yoni. And it wasn't until later I learned that it was because my root chakra had become disrupted,
Wow.
that my sense of security and foundation and belonging in the world was disrupted. And I felt like such a fraud because I remember this was 2 weeks after I was released. I was supposed to go to the final teacher training for my trauma-informed yoga teacher certification, and I couldn't even get out of bed. I couldn't even walk.
Wow.
And simultaneously, I started seeking mentorship with other healers who worked with plants and body work. And one of my mentors, Marcia Lopez, said, like, I remember saying to her, I feel like such a fraud as somebody who wants to step into this alternative form of healing, but I can't even heal myself. I don't want to go to the doctor. And she said to me, June, our work is not about creating opposition with these systems.
Mm.
Like, go to the doctor. Like, we're meant to work alongside these people.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
yeah. And when I went to the doctor, they actually couldn't find anything wrong with me. And they said, everything that's happening to me is going to naturally dissipate, which it did within
Incredible.
a week. And I was like, what the heck is happening? And so, and it was at the peak of my Saturn return. So I was about to turn 29. And so here I am, like about to turn 30, jobless, feeling like I got my dream job, but that was stripped from me. And I started seeking alternative mentorship, people who can teach me how to cultivate an abundance mindset.
Beautiful.
And no longer be a victim to my past or my circumstances, but start envisioning who it is I can be and embodying that person as if they are already here. And so since then, it's been a grand adventure. Most of the clients who come to me are also people who feel like they've been burned by the system, or who feel like they are going to be called out by their community if they want to start charging for their gifts. And a lot of it is just the stories that we're creating, and how is it that it is being reflective of our external environment. And so that's really how my services ended up unfolding, is how is it that I can merge my gifts as a spoken word artist, as a theater artist, as a storyteller, with coaching. So of course I have my life coaching certification. I have all these different certifications, but if we are talking about decolonizing the way that we show up in the world, then beyond the certifications, it's going to be about reconnecting with the resilience of our ancestors, to no longer be tied to these trauma loops, and celebrate that we are here to create a different narrative and a new legacy for the next generation. Prior to capitalism, our ancestors, they were entrepreneurs before it was a fancy word. And so we get to step into that.
And I'm super excited to be able to dive more into the connection of exploring and learning more about the resiliency of our ancestors. But I just want to highlight one piece that you shared in your transformation, the experience of moving from a space of hustle and stress and overwhelm to more of a space of grounding into yourself and being able to, as you said, align and combine your gifts of being an artist and a storyteller and being able to serve as a coach. That it was in releasing that grasping or those cultural norms that told us and that compelled us to sacrifice ourselves in the name of being of service. And I think that that is is a very powerful myth that a lot of folks in the giving and the healing and the service community still hold to this day. And being able to really allow in and acknowledge the other really beautiful piece that you shared, which is that as one person, we may not ever be able to heal the entire world, but as we begin the process of healing ourselves, we can have such a powerful impact on the people around us and have so much more energy and gifts and love and attention to be able to share as we move through the world and as we support other people in their process of healing. Mm-hmm. And so I love everything that you were sharing about your journey, and want to dig a little bit deeper into the work that you've been doing around creating and cultivating a deep connection with your ancestors and sharing that with the women that you coach and also with your community more broadly. So I would love if you could speak to us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I just did my TEDx talk called How to Connect with Your Ancestors, even if you don't know where they come from. And this was birthed from the very first online summit that I produced, which was called Your Story Medicine, How to Move from Trauma to Resilience. And then I did a second one, which was still called Your Story Medicine, but How to Speak Your Truth, Lead Heart-Centered Workshops, and Become the Author of Your Life. And so as I was navigating what my gifts are, what my services are, I had to start with the listening to others and their journey.
Sure.
And the 3 questions that I led my experts with were, what is your ancestral lineage? And how has this played a role in your upbringing? And then also I always ask, like, what is it that you're grateful for in this moment? Because I also know that if we can cultivate more gratitude in our lives without spiritually bypassing,
sure,
but embracing whatever adversities we've overcome as a part of our medicine that we get to transmute, then that becomes the frequency that others need around us, especially if we are already surrounded by so much fear and anxiety and isolation. So for us to step into this role as a healer, as a space holder, is going to require that we show up in a way that counteracts this dominant narrative that wants us to be in fear and playing small. And so how my ancestors have supported me on this journey, I get a lot of messages from people saying, oh, can you help me with ancestral healing? And I'm like, what are people expecting? Do they want me to bring out my sage? And even that is a very complicated, complex layer within itself, because I think it is important that we talk about cultural appropriation and what are the healing practices we are incorporating in our services. And then what does that say to people who may not know what their ancestral lineage is, but know that they have this calling, this pull to hold space for other people's transformations?
Absolutely.
My mentors, Marcia Lopez and Kelly Garza, who is the creator of Steamy Chick, which is now the largest vaginal steam company in the world.
Incredible.
Well, so I was one of their very first guinea pigs in their program. And it took place in a yurt in the South Bay of San Pedro here in Southern California.
Nice.
And they had guest speakers who talked about womb healing and yoni steaming. And we talked a lot about cultural appropriation as well. And because the teachings were rooted in Mesoamerican tradition, I felt like it wasn't something that I could claim as my own or practice.
Sure.
But another sister, Indigimama, Pankitsani, who is also a body worker and healer based here in Long Beach, shared a testimonial of one of her clients who also happens to be Thai American, but in the East Coast. And this testimonial was speaking about how powerful this medicine is and how she's excited to go back to her ancestral homeland to learn more about this healing tradition. And I was like, wait, what? Okay, what's this?
You're like, it happens in Thailand?
And the only reason why I knew she was Thai was because her last name is the province my mother is from.
Whoa.
And I rarely meet anybody who's from this province in the south of Thailand.
No coincidences.
So I stalked her, messaged her, found her on Facebook, and several months later, we met at the airport in Bangkok and took a train up to Chiang Mai together to be apprentices to this traditional Thai midwife.
Beautiful. That's amazing.
Granted, all of our classmates besides us two were white, and so it brought up a lot of stuff for me, like, who am I to reclaim my ancestors' medicine? Like, who the heck are you people here? And it seemed like every person who was at this training happened to be certified in everything you could think of. Like, I just came back from India and I'm certified as a yoga teacher, and someone else who's like, oh, I studied shamanism in the Amazon. And of course, like, I'm here for a very different reason, which is wanting to connect with my ancestors. And I felt like, again, a total fraud. Who am I to reclaim these practices when these white people know these skills better than I do? One of the things that did trip me out, though, was when my teacher brought out the yoni steaming chair, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just learned about this stuff. And so it just speaks to how colonization has stripped this medicine from so many of us, and how we are in this very fertile time right now where I feel like we are our reincarnated ancestors who are starting to remember that this is within our lineage. And so when I came back from that trip, my mother told me that her great-grandmother was actually the village midwife, and that as a child, she would follow her around the village, always ready to catch a reincarnated ancestor returning to this realm from
and you didn't know that before you traveled there.
And my mom is a retired nurse, and so she grew up apparently being exposed to both worlds, but never felt like it was important to tell me her own experience, because she's like, I didn't think that anybody would care about that.
Sure.
And it then unfolded stories of her traumatic birth experience. Of having me and my sister, who's 11 years older than me, alone in a cold hospital room without any family by her bedside, unlike how she grew up, where people were birthed in the
surrounded by community,
where what is it called, like postpartum depression was non-existent.
Imagine.
Because the birthing body was always cared for, always had at least 40 days of rest. Whereas my mom, and this is a very similar experience for many people who are immigrants or who may be low income, she was back at work within 2 weeks, working in the maternity unit in a different hospital floor.
Sure.
And so then it begs the question of how many of us are carrying the pain and the trauma of the ones who came before us. And what is it that we are doing to essentially reclaim? And so for the past 3 years, it's also been a beautiful journey of repairing the relationship I have with my mother, and getting subtle signs from my ancestors that I am totally on path, even when it doesn't feel like I am. And to also embrace the ancestor that I myself am becoming.
Yes. And do you mind sharing an example of maybe a time when you feel as though your ancestors have helped to confirm that you're on the right path and you're leading your life in the way that you said?
There's so many moments. And so it's not like I get a voice that booms from the clouds and says, you are on path.
Sure.
Like the Lion King or like the stars suddenly speak to me. I wish I had those kinds of experiences. Maybe I have, and I'm just discrediting it. But I think that people tend to overcomplicate what it means to connect with our ancestors.
Sure.
And okay, I had this one experience where a couple months ago, I attended a storytelling conference in the Bay Area. I didn't know a single soul.
Okay.
I was just like, okay, if I am proclaiming myself as a storytelling coach,
Mm.
I need to surround myself with other people who carry these roles and these titles and see what it is they're up to.
Amazing.
And so, and that's another thing. It's like many of us tend to stay in our bubbles of comfort. And so,
Mm.
like, okay, my future self is going to require me to do things that may not feel comfortable at first.
Yeah.
And so I flew up there, took a bus, like 3 different buses to get to this destination. And as I'm getting ready to check in, I'm like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be here. Like, I really don't know anybody. And I'm the youngest person in this space. Everybody is at least 10 or 20 years my senior.
The fear voice is coming up.
Uh-huh. It was still very white.
Mm.
And as I'm checking in, there is a tote bag hanging on the coat rack behind the person at the front desk. And when I look closely, I see at first it has Thai writing on it. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. But then when I looked even closer, apparently it's a tote bag from my mom's village, from her province, because that part was in English. I can't read Thai. So
Right.
I had no idea that there's a storytelling convening that happens in my mom's village. It's like an international thing where people come together.
Oh, wow.
And it's just the strangest thing, because growing up, I feel like people had no idea where this part of Thailand was.
Mm.
And I'll speak to another experience that when I was actually, so in my mid-20s, I did have a point in my life where I went back to Thailand for 4 months, and I was actually a singer in a reggae band.
So cool.
But the way I got connected to this reggae band was because I happened to find them on MySpace back when we had it, the days, and I messaged them, and I was already doing music here in the States, and I just said, hey, I really love what it is you're doing, and it would be so amazing if we met up one day. And they asked me where my mom's province was, and when I told them, they said, oh, our family's from there too. Why don't you come out here and we'll jam?
Yeah.
Next thing you know, I am touring with a band of Thai Rastafaris in my motherland. And the very last show that we did happened to be in Patalung, my mom's province, which is also their family's province. And it was the very first international Thai shadow puppetry festival. But what was so beautiful about this experience is that they flew in people from different parts of the world to not only share their shadow puppets, but to also share their traditional music. So we had West African dancers from Nigeria.
Wow.
And I just remember this moment of the people from my mom's province playing the drums, and then these Nigerian drummers also playing the drums, and these dancers that came out. And then it clicked for me. Oh my gosh, no wonder why at previous events where I'm just like dancing on the dance floor, people have told me that people have asked me if I did West African dance. I was like, I don't even know, just moving with my body. But
there are similarities in style?
And it was the very first time where I actually witnessed it in front of my eyes, because otherwise the dominant narrative of Thai dance is like the slow, royal, classical dance, which I didn't grow up with and I don't have the patience for. And so I just thought I was different.
Yeah.
So you never know. When you say yes to your ancestors, when you say yes to reclaiming this medicine, the evidence will start to reveal itself.
And just to bring it back kind of to your current practices and how you say yes to your ancestral medicine, how do you prioritize pleasure and self-care while sharing your gifts and serving the world?
If it's taken me over 30 years to normalize stress, then I know it's not going to be an overnight process to unlearn it.
Absolutely.
And so even with the clients that I work with, because they're all women of color or people of color outside of the gender binaries, what I'm coming to realize is, as much as I can teach about strategy and structure with how to cultivate your sacred offerings on fertile soil, it's actually going to be about doing less. How is it that I can hold you accountable in creating more space to just be? And then go backwards, looking at your life experiences, looking at the stories you've accumulated over time to serve as evidence for the medicine that you're already giving to the world. So that's, for me, it's like, okay, if we want to talk about structure and strategy, like, let's just celebrate how far you've already come to get here.
Absolutely. And acknowledging that, like, as you said, we have spent our whole lifetimes absorbing a lot of these messages from the world around us. And it takes time for us to start to let go and release and reprogram and invite new practices into our lives and into our routines. And I know earlier you were mentioning participating in a trauma-informed yoga training. And similarly, I'm going through one now and just learning more about how incredibly powerful our brain and our central nervous system are, and how they have such intense memory and hold any experiences that are overwhelming to our system. So giving ourselves the invitation to actually rest and release and integrate and understand our experiences, rather than continuing to just push our emotions down and not acknowledge, is so important. And it's not what we've been traditionally taught to do. We have to re-educate ourselves and build new relationships with ourselves.
And the strangest thing is that the more I say yes to my joy, the more I say yes to pleasure, the more I say yes to curiosity, the universe then says yes to me. Because so many of us are constantly striving for the life that we want. Like, when I'm happy, when I get this thing, when I make money, when I have stability, then I'll be happy.
That externalizing
versus,
of happiness.
And this has been, like, seriously, the power of manifestation is, if you can cultivate the feeling that you want to experience in the future as if it is already here right now, then your ancestors will step in and say, oh, okay, you're ready. You're showing us that you know how to treat this sacred medicine now.
Yep.
So I also don't want to say that this doesn't happen without hard work. But I also know that my business is healthy when I am healthy.
Absolutely.
And so I show up in the world now asking, how is it that I want to make other people feel? What is it that I could do to just brighten one person's day? Because the reality is, so many of us are waiting or constantly being in that, like, I don't have enough. Like, I say, even if there's no money in the bank, show up as abundance. Abundance is just an energy. It's just an energetic current.
Right.
And if that's what the world needs in this moment, then be it. Speaking of the stories that we tell ourselves based off of our past experiences, I think one of the biggest mindset shifts for me has been asking myself, what does this experience have to teach me versus why me?
Amazing.
Instead of being a victim to my circumstances, how is it that I can transmute my past experiences into opportunities for change? And another one of my favorite quotes is by a spoken word artist named Andrea Gibson. And they say, we must create. It is the only thing louder than destruction. And so I feel like our lives are the greatest masterpiece that we get to create. So for anybody who is listening, if you're curious where exactly do I begin? I would ask you to envision this future version of yourself, the ancestor you are becoming. What is it that people have to say about themselves as a result of being in your presence?
Super powerful.
Mm-hmm. And then how can you start showing up as that? And it's just like, and so as I'm being very intentional, being responsible about the energy that I bring into every space I walk into, recognizing that I get to set the tone, I get to set the frequency, I get to be the thermostat versus a thermometer, then it's amazing how like you can essentially become the alchemist of not only your life, but the alchemist of other people's lives and how it unfolds. Like I'll have people randomly come up to me on the streets, like not in a creepy way, but just be like, or like at the grocery store and just say, there's something about you and your energy. I don't know what it is, but I know it's what I needed. So thank you. It's like, wow, this shit works.
It's tangible. People around you can feel it and sense it and know it. And I also wanted to ask, what does being more connected mean to you in your life, in your work?
So there's a theory called social contagion, which is essentially about how we as people are contagious with our energy. And when I think about being connected, I think about who are the 5 people who I surround myself with.
Sure.
Or who I choose to surround myself with. What is the media I consume? What are the stories that I'm telling myself? And does it feel good in my body? And so I know that one of my callings in life is to be a connector, is to break these silos, is to embody what's possible. But that cannot happen until I am first connected with myself.
Incredible. Well, I want to end on that note and give our audience an opportunity to learn more about how they can stay connected with you and exciting things that are going on in your world.
Yeah. So by the time this comes out, my TEDx talk will probably be live. And so I'd love to share that with your audience. And what I do in my program is we always begin by cultivating a relationship with our ancestors. And so I invite everybody to create a space in their home for an altar. And if not in their home, at least it could be something that always reminds them that there are many people who came before us who took up enough space for us to be able to have a voice today. So in a time where people of our identity, our cultural lineage, our gender may have been silenced and persecuted for speaking up. And so my invitation to everybody would be to like call on those ancestors. They don't have to be of your blood lineage. Carve out a sacred space for them and treat this altar as if it is a living plant. Spend time with it, cultivate it, feed it, and make it a space that you always return to whenever you forget that you are not alone on this path.
Ooh, so exciting. So, I personally am very excited to dive into that gift because I haven't had an opportunity to kind of like replenish and give some love to my altar in a while. So I'm very excited.
Yes, exactly. So take it beyond just being a centerpiece, but treat it as an actual living ancestor. So that would be my gift and my invitation to you all. And And if you have any breakthroughs, then you can tune into my Facebook group and share it through there, or follow me on Instagram at Jumakay.
Wonderful. Well, June, thank you so much again for participating in our summit. And I'm so excited to staying connected with you and to listening to your TEDx talk when it's available. Thanks so much, June.